Welcome to the very last colloquium of the semester, about to after the summer. So it's a great pleasure to be welcoming Dr. Wendy Rogers. I had to write this out because I had failed to memorize your title. So Wendy Shahid and Carson Khan, Professor of Applied Health Sciences at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Said that more fluently than I was.
You did it well. Practice is good.
So she is very well known for her work integrating human factors research with cognitive aging and other aspects of this. I shouldn't say other aspects of disability more generally. And she has authored a large number of peer-reviewed publications and also, is it 3 books?
Or so.
One of which won a prize in 2009. She gave a wonderful presentation to at our public lecture last night on campus. She's very gracefully agreed to give a colloquium today. So I'm really pleased to welcome you. Look forward to hearing what you have to say. Please join me in welcoming you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here today. I'm the director of the Human Factors and Aging Lab at the University of Illinois, and this is our official lab template. And so we encourage when our students or postdocs are presenting to replace the pictures with members of their own family. So these are members of my family. So you see my mom in purple, my dad wearing his Korean War hat, Grandma Rogers, who was a lot of fun with Big Bird on a cruise, Grandma Cunningham, and none of them are alive anymore, but they're still here in spirit. But my sister is in her 70s, she's very much alive. And my husband, Dan, also in his 70s, very much alive. And my friend, Nolan Ryan, that's a baseball player. Nolan Basher, that's funny. That's really funny, good slip. Those of you who study slips and cognition, you can explain to me later why that happened. Nolan and I climbed Kilimanjaro when he was in his 70s. So these are my inspirations. And so when other people present, they replace it with their own inspirations in their family. So it's just kind of fun. So my topic today, I wanted it to be very different from last night. In case you heard my talk last night, so you would be bored today, is enhancing social engagement for older adults through technology. So thinking first about the importance of social engagement, one of my students put this slide for me together just after COVID-19, when people were starting to study some of the effects of social isolation. And so some of the statistics, 27% of older adults in the US live alone. The average household size of older adults in the US is 2.1 people, whereas around the world, it's 3.4 people. So you're getting these smaller household sizes. And the older adults are more likely to live alone in the US compared to anywhere else in the world. Prior to COVID-19, approximately 1/4 of older adults 65 plus were socially isolated. And of course, COVID-19 limited physical and social interaction and maybe aggravated this challenge of limited social connectedness and engagement. But there are some data that show that those who did not experience, I touched nothing, there we go, okay, that was magic. Those who did not experience intensified loneliness were those who were more likely to use technology for social engagement. So there's a lot of potential here. The US Surgeon General released a report in 2023 about the loneliness and isolation epidemic. It's not just about older adults, it's about this issue more broadly. A few years ago, a postdoc and a graduate student and I wrote a book chapter where I was really surprised actually to find how much evidence there is about the relationship between social engagement and health outcomes. So people with higher levels of social engagement have reduced hypertension, decreased development of dementia, increased mental health and psychological well-being, and even reduced mortality rates. So I was really struck by the power of this. in terms of social engagement influencing health outcomes. I should also pause and say I'm open to questions throughout, so don't feel like you have to wait. It's not like last night where it was very formal, so feel free to ask along the way. And so one study we explored people who were at risk for social isolation. Now, just because you live alone doesn't mean you're lonely, right? And so trying to understand that relationship. So in this study, we had 300 people. They were recruited for an intervention. This is just the baseline data. We recruited 300 people who were over age 65. They lived alone in the community. They had minimum computer or internet use, and they didn't work or volunteer more than 5 hours a week, and they didn't go to a senior center. So this is a group that we identified as at risk for social isolation. And we gave them, you may be familiar with this, the UCLA loneliness scale, which measures a 20 different items that gives you this assessment of a person's self-perception of loneliness. One of the things that I think is so striking about these data is that a normal distribution or what, right? This is a group of people who are all at risk for social isolation, but then you look at the loneliness and it's pretty normally distributed. So there are some people that are perfectly happy living alone, they entertain themselves, they actually prefer it that way, and there are other people who are experiencing more indications of loneliness. So that, what we took was then to explore, well, how does that relate to, we had 2 outcome measures that we explored. One is predicting depression using the CESD scale. And what we found first was that social isolation and social support predicted loneliness, those measures. And then social isolation and loneliness predicted depression directly. So there's this interaction between loneliness, social isolation, both of which are having an effect on depression. We also predicted self-rating of health. And here we found just the direct relationship between self-perception of loneliness and self-perception of health. So those of you that have heard me talk or are familiar with some of the work that we do know that I'm very interested in the potential of technology to support successful aging. And so one of the things we were interested in is if you're going to design a social engagement intervention for a technology tool, what does it need to include? So in this paper, we thought specifically about supporting people with mild cognitive impairment, but really the framework is relevant to anybody of any age. If you're going to design technology to support social engagement, what do you have to consider? And so we developed this framework that, in a sense, collected all of the variables from the literature that have been shown to be important that we should think about. I'm a big fan of frameworks. I like to think about what's the space that I need to be concerned with, and then use that to guide my design. So in this case, the bottom part is what is the network that we're focusing on or that we're trying to support? Is it close friends, family? Is it just acquaintances? What is the size that might be optimal for this intervention or that people might prefer? What is the quality of the interaction you're trying to encourage or enhance? And what is the ideal dose? What's the frequency of interaction that's going to be effective, daily, weekly, monthly, et cetera? The top part is the activity itself. What is the purpose of the social engagement intervention that you're trying to develop? Just to give somebody something fun to do. Maybe it's cognitively stimulating, maybe it's a learning activity. What is the best format, in person or remote? What type of activity, formal, informal? Again, the frequency and the duration, and then the content. What is the content of your interaction, your intervention rather, that is going to be useful? And then thinking, of course, about the context and the health factor. So what I wanted to do today is to go in depth about one project and really show you from beginning to end, current, how we've tried to apply this framework for a social engagement intervention. And this is work that was initially funded by an SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research Grant from the National Institute on Aging, phase 1. Phase one is feasibility. Does your idea have a prayer of working, for the target audience that you're interested in? So it's 6 months to a year. It's relatively small. So you're just trying to show the feasibility of your idea. So the company we were working with is called oneclick.chat. Somebody was asking me, and you were asking me this morning, how did I get connected with them? I did an interview on NPR. Dylan heard my interview and he called me, emailed me, and he said, can we set up a meeting? I said, yeah, I'm really busy. I'm sorry. Contact me again in a couple of months. And he did. A couple of months later, we set up a call and we started working together. So he was proactive and persistent, and that paid off. And then the Illinois research team, I mentioned my colleague Raksha Mudar, who's an alum of UT Dallas. So she was here in 2008 and received her PhD in communication sciences and disorders. She's now a faculty member in speech and hearing science, and she and I work on the robotics work I talked about last night, as well as on this project. And then a few of the students yesterday at lunch were asking me, where do my students go? And I was looking at this slide because all of these students have now graduated. And so Lizzie is now a faculty member at the University of Miami of Ohio. Lydia works for a small startup company that designs technologies for older adults. And Tina works at Medtronics, a large healthcare technology company. So these students with this background can go and do a lot of different things. And then our community partner is Clark Lindsay, which is a CCRC, continuing care retirement community nearby to campus. So the oneclick.chat, it's a video chat platform. And I want to emphasize, we started this long before COVID, long before people were using Zoom. So this was more of a novel idea at that point. How might we use video chat to engage people with each other? And over any topic of mutual interest, they could join a social setting without leaving home. You read this now, it's like, of course, we do that all the time, but then did not. And also using it to participate in learning events and discuss topics of shared interest. So that was the idea of this video chat platform. Our goals were to understand preferences of and attitudes towards this system by older adults who did or did not have mild cognitive impairment, and redesign the system. So the company already had this platform, this prototype. It was functioning. It was an actual platform, but it wasn't designed for older adults. And that's why they engaged us, is to improve the design for older adults, and especially older adults with MCI, and to explore the potential benefits of the system. So I'll go over, this is one paper that if you're interested in this topic, I encourage you to look at this paper because it lays out the whole series. This is really the summary paper of this phase one SBIR, where we talk about an interview study that we did to explore attitudes and interests, evaluation we did of the existing system, and then a field trial that we did. All of this was in the phase one. So I'll just talk about this fairly briefly, just to give you a sense. One of the things that I just want to emphasize is all the development work that goes into something before you can even do an RCT, but you have to do all this development work up front. So we started by interviewing people with and without MCI. We demoed the system, and then we explored their reactions to it. And we used something very standard. It's called the system usability scale. 10 items, easy to administer, and it's even called a quick and dirty measure of usability. So we use that quite a bit. We also did a heuristic evaluation. This is a human factors approach, and I'll show you a little bit about what that looks like, where you take human factors experts and you evaluate the system. You're evaluating the usability of the system. And then we worked with the OneClick company to iteratively redesign the system. And then we did a short interaction study with older adults. And then we did a field trial with 13 older adults with and without MCI, use the system in their home for 4 weeks. And this was just a pre-post. It was just a pilot, just to see, again, phase one is feasibility, right? So we're showing the potential of our system. So from the interview, we explored some of the things that were in that framework that I mentioned. What do they want the social engagement topics to be? Who do they want to meet with? How big of a group? Would they prefer to talk to other older adults, young people? And who do they want to talk to? Those of you that are in the field of cognitive aging may be aware of this idea that older adults don't want to build new social relationships or new social connections. I firmly disagree with that. I think that's wrong. And we have evidence from this study. But that was a mindset that people have. You make the theory is socio-emotional selectivity. And the idea is, well, I have limited resources. I'm just going to focus on the people that I already know and my family and my friends. I don't want to spend time meeting new people. I don't think that's right. And I think that actually has slowed us down a little bit in supporting social engagement for older adults. But that's just my side editorial comment. We also found that they really liked this system. They could see the value. And we use the system usability scale, as I mentioned. What's also nice about this is there's the standard. If your SUS score, you'll hear me say that, is above 68, that's presumed to be acceptable. Not necessarily as good as it could be, but it's acceptable. And so when companies are designing technologies, they use this just to say, okay, this is good enough, we'll move forward with this prototype. Then we also gathered some information from them. We showed them the system, what they didn't like, what was confusing. So when you first logged in, it just said, need a name. And they were like, well, why? What? It just didn't make sense to them. So relatively simple fixes that we were able to do. Things like contrast, font size, some of the basic things we know about how to design something. And then there were some concerns about maybe somebody would dominate the conversation. Maybe they would be concerned about remembering what they're supposed to do. So when we designed the system, we made sure to put knowledge in the world versus knowledge in the head. So the idea of environmental support. How do you put the cues out there that will help them know what they're supposed to do? The heuristic evaluation, if you're not familiar with this, it comes from a person named Nielsen. And the idea is there are certain design heuristics that whatever we're talking about should be followed. And so you take experts who know what those heuristics are and you evaluate the system. Things like, is there a match between the system and the world that people are familiar with? Are things consistent across components of the system and are standards followed? Issues of design, visibility, I mentioned recognition versus recall, user control, can I decide how to move through the system? Error prevention, can I avoid making errors, but can I also understand what to do if I make an error? So these are standard heuristics, and you go through the system looking for these issues. And we found a lot of them. Okay, we did not design the system, the company did. What was nice about working with the company is they said, okay, great, tell us how to fix them, right? And so we identified, you take each heuristic that's violated, you explain the violation, and you tell the company, this is high need. You should fix this. Absolutely. This is, and it's not that problematic. And this is purely aesthetic. You don't have to worry about it if you don't want to. So we identified all of these 54 different issues and they fixed 41 of them, right? They were able to address 41 of the different issues. And so I won't go into some of the details, but I'll just say we tested it again. And we again had our system usability scale above the point of 68. Then we did our small field trial with 13 participants for 4 weeks and identified different facilitators and potential barriers. It's very iterative, right? We've worked hard to get the system to be usable. We're still identifying problems when people are using it on their own in their homes. And we did these pre-post comparisons and found positive changes for friendship, loneliness, and quality of life, even with this small sample. Good. Ready to go. Now we apply for the phase 2. So we've shown the feasibility of our system, the potential for it helping our target population, and then we moved into the phase 2. The team gets bigger now. This is a larger grant, usually 2 years or so, much bigger budget. And the expectation is you're going to be able to show the efficacy of the system that you're interested in. So we have our Illinois team, and then we've had community partners where we were testing it out. I live in Champaign, Urbana. That's a relatively small population. So we had partners up in Chicago so we could broaden our community participation. So we developed this intervention where we wanted people to be able to engage with others on these different content areas. So we developed 60 unique topics in these categories that people were interested in, and they could choose what events they wanted to attend: arts and culture, nature, health and wellness, life experiences, science and technology, recreation. And so they could sign up for these events and go and talk to people who had shared interest in that topic. So we've completed one randomized controlled trial to assess the effectiveness, and then a second one for caregivers, and I'll show you some of the data. And we did a baseline paper that talks all about the methods for the study, and then the outcomes paper have already been published. So this is a little bit hard to see, but I just want to show you what the events were like. So you would log in, and all you needed was a link. You didn't have to sign up. You didn't have to do anything elaborate. You click a link. You're in a waiting area. You're welcomed by a moderator, and then you watch basically a PowerPoint presentation with images that we have curated based on those topics that we mentioned. And then you divide up into breakout groups for conversations. The important thing is the breakout groups are not moderated. There's no researcher there to listen in or moderate. So it's a very, very low effort for people who want to use this kind of platform. And people are just talking to each other. And we gave them discussion ideas, prompts that they could use, but they could just talk about whatever they wanted. And it was about 20 to 30-minute conversation. And then we did an evaluation at the end. And I won't go over the details, but I imagine you're familiar with these consort diagrams where you say, we started with, 127 people, we did screenings, and then we ended up randomizing 99 people. And in this study, we had an intervention group and a waitlist group. And the intervention was only 8 weeks. So I say only because I'm going to show you the data in a moment. I wish it had been longer. We had a 4-week assessment, and then we had an 8-week assessment. And we had the wait list come back and do it later. So when you do these RCTs, the data are never as clean as you might like them to be. So I'm going to walk you through this, and you'll see why I wish the intervention were a little bit longer. This is showing loneliness, okay? And look at the blue line. The blue line is the wait list control. And you're seeing that loneliness, if anything, is increasing a little bit over time. It's certainly not going down. For the intervention group, it actually went up, but then it was starting to go down. And what I would love is if I had a point here and a point here where I could see, does that benefit continue? So future studies, I would want to run this intervention longer, because it may be that the benefits of the social engagement take longer to manifest on a measure like the UCLA loneliness scale. I also think that's not a great measure. I think it's not necessarily sensitive to what we're interested in.
Thanks.
Yes, please.
Are the conversations they're having with the same people?
No.
So do you think that plays a role?
And I should say, no, not necessarily. So you'll see in some of the qualitative data that they will say, oh, I got to meet some people over time, but it was really just signing up for an event, and it could be different people every time. And yes, maybe it would be more effective if you had a cohort that you always interacted with. But you'll also see that sometimes people in their cohort, they don't really like, and so that could be negative as well. But that would be another direction to go, absolutely. The second measure is something that we developed that is social activity frequency, like how much they felt like they were engaging in social activities. And here again, the blue line is the wait list control, and you see that going down over time, whereas the intervention group, their perception of social activity is going up over time. And again, I would love to be able to continue them further.
So it could be, if I was Randy, Randy Engel, I would say this is regression to mean, So does this, stay true even after controlling for baseline, like an answer?
Yeah, so we've done various kinds of analyses to try to control for some of those things. Yeah, exactly. But it's not, this is your dissertation. You get these data and you're like, oh my gosh, okay, how do I interpret this? What's really going on? And this is a complicated intervention. One of the next things we looked at was the dose, right? How often did they participate? How engaged were they? And this is the distribution. So the darker gray are the people who ended up dropping out for whatever reason. They withdrew or they dropped out. But even the people who stayed in it for the whole 8 weeks, there's a lot of range. We were talking earlier about requiring people. We encourage them to do 2 per week, but many of them did not. And so this was exploratory. We looked at the relationship between attendance at events and quality of life change over time. And we did have a significant correlation. So again, relatively small effects for this group of individuals. The other thing we didn't do in this study is we didn't recruit people who were at risk for social isolation. Other studies, we've done that. You find people who really need this intervention, you might see bigger effects. So the qualitative data, I just want to share, most positive. So 79% of all of the remarks were very positive. And they liked meeting people from different walks of life all over the country. I enjoyed conversations with people that I didn't know. And then after, and this is to your point, after a while, I started to see some of the same people and get to know them. And it was a pleasure to interact with these folks. The remarks that were negative were sometimes you get people in a group that just talk too much. They would come every week and I didn't have anything in common with them, or they were dominating some of those issues. And if you're having an unmoderated intervention, well, that might happen. And so sometimes I was glad the half hour was over because nobody really had interesting things to say. One of the things we also are starting to look at now is the content. So were the ratings different depending on the particular content of the event that they were at? Some might be more conducive to conversation than others. One of the follow-ups I won't talk about today, but my colleague is looking at targeting this specifically for Southeast Asian older adults and designing the content that might be of interest to them. And so you might have to tailor the content to different groups. But overall, the comments from the qualitative interviews were very positive. They talked about enjoying the overall experience, getting to know people, and, starting to say, wow, there were a couple of people that I really enjoyed talking to. On their own, they shared emails. And there's a group in Chicago that has lunch together here that met on this platform. We didn't, because of IRB, we couldn't give information away, but they were free to share the information with each other. I felt connected. We had interesting things to talk about. I enjoyed this conversation and learning about what others' experiences are. So they felt like they were learning something new. And the other thing that we did, again, if you're interested in developing interventions that are based on technology, we wrote a paper that is best practices. If you're going to do a technology intervention, what are some things that you should think about? And we have details about considering user needs. How do you design the training? If you need to teach them to use your technology, what are some things you need to consider? The personnel that's required to support these kinds of interventions, they also need training. So we have some details about how to do that, how to structure the delivery of the intervention, and then how to evaluate whether it works or not. So this is really like a how-to manual if you're doing a technology intervention. And so we follow this. This is also from Nielsen's website. I encourage you, if you're interested in the topic, to go to the nngroup.com. It's the Nielsen Norman group. And you'll see about how to do a heuristic analysis. There's a lot of how-to guides on this website. But they talk about this user-centered design process. This is everything that I do follows this process, where you start by understanding, and you saw that with some of our interviews that we were doing, develop your prototype and test that prototype early on where you can do the iteration, and then do your more formal testing with an RCT, for example, and then look at ways to generalize. And so the next study that I want to share briefly is using this approach to support social communication needs for dementia carers. So this is a feasibility study that was funded by the RRF Foundation for Aging. And we moved away from the one-click platform. You don't need one click because by this time, everybody's using Zoom. And so we moved it to be done on Zoom. We still had to train people how to use Zoom because not everybody could use it, but it allows us to generalize the platform a little bit more. So people who are caregivers have reduced social communication opportunities, which leads to social isolation and loneliness. And as I showed at the beginning, that can affect physical health, cognitive health, and emotional health. And there are very few interventions that look at caregivers or carers' broader social communication needs. There are a lot of interventions that provide caregiver support. So maybe it's a support group, and it could be online, that is helping you meet other caregivers and talk about support needs and what are resources available. Very, very important. But none of that is helping them as a person. Sometimes I don't want to think about the fact that I'm a caregiver. I just want to be able to do something, for myself for 30 minutes, but I can't. I'm caring for somebody. It's hard for me to leave the home. And so that was more what we were targeting with our intervention. It's almost a type of respite for them. It's giving them a chance to do something that is completely separate from their caregiver responsibilities. And so this was a pilot study, so it was a pre-post. We don't have a control group here. One of the things we also did was 2 baselines 4 to 6 weeks apart, because what we don't know a lot about is how much does social engagement change just over time naturally without any intervention. So we had baseline 1, then we did a baseline 2, and then we did the 8-week session intervention and then a post assessment. 60 years or older, caring for somebody with Alzheimer's or other dementia, and they'd been a caregiver for at least 3 months, and they had to have a tablet or a computer with a camera. And so again, this is within participants, and so we have 68 people in this study, and we are seeing significant differences for the friendship scale, where post is better, feeling more connectedness, and also for the social activity engagement measure that we developed, we're seeing significant effects. So these were people who maybe were a bit more isolated, who had more potential to benefit from this kind of intervention. One area that we'd really like to pursue, we're writing an NIH grant right now, is to think about measures of social engagement. They're not really that good, and we need sensitive measures that tap into what it is we're trying to affect in these interventions. We also looked at how much they enjoyed the conversation. And one of the things that I think is interesting is that early on, the ratings were a little bit lower as they're trying to understand, well, what does this thing work? Maybe at the beginning, they were a little inhibited in conversing about what they were doing. But over time, and it stays steady, they continue to enjoy doing this over time. And then the qualitative comments, I enjoyed every minute. Kindred spirits, that we're living with our spouses who are in varying stages of dementia. So they're all carers. They all understand each other, and they didn't feel like I have to explain who I am or what my life is like. They get it, but now we could talk about something different. We really did get to escape our demanding caregiver situation. We laughed, we finished each other's sentences. How else can I say thank you for this opportunity? I enjoyed every session, no matter the subject. It's so nice to connect to others in my age group who are in similar situations. Thank you for having this study. This was a theme over and over and over again. So nice to have this human connection and let the conversation flow. And so we're fitting a need, that we're seeing for these individuals. So when you think about social engagement interventions via video chat, there's a high potential for impact. This is a low-cost intervention. It doesn't require moderation. It's platform agnostic, so you can do it on Zoom or one click. You can do it on a tablet or a laptop. Some of our participants even did it on their phone. One of the things I think we need to continue to do is to explore benefits for different groups and learn how to tailor the intervention as needed. And then we're also looking at partnering with community groups to be able to do this on a much broader scale. So I have a little bit more time. So I'm just going to give you one slide about several different projects so that you can ask me questions if it's something that you're interested in. So one other study that we did related to social engagement was using the Amazon Alexa for older adults who had mobility disabilities. This was done during COVID, and we mailed them. We called it digital assistants in a box. We mailed them a box that had Amazon Alexa, smart light, smart plug, and most important, instructions for how to do everything. And we did a Zoom call with them, helped them get things set up, and then we tracked them over time. 25 older adults who are wheelchair users. So if you're a wheelchair user, you can't get a box this big, right? So we also had to think about the physical. How big can the box be? How do they unpack everything? They lived alone for the most part, not all of them. They were able to learn how to use it. And after 5 weeks of use, they reported reductions in. Another study that we were talking about this morning is under development, and this is using virtual reality that will support cognitive activity and social engagement. So we're calling the system CAST. We want to support cognitive activities, so learning, training, cultural activities, more physical activities such as bowling or games or hobbies, social engagement, and then also teaching them some technology skills through using the system. So this system is under development right now. We're testing it, we're curating all of the apps, and we're developing, very important, the training materials, because we're going to put it in people's homes and have them use it for 6 months. And we'll be exploring the potential benefits of having VR system in your own home. Another area that I won't go into in detail because I talked about it a great deal last night is the potential of different types of robots for social support. So one of the robots we're working with is Misty. I won't play the videos. Another one is Moxie, and using these robots for social engagement. So the Misty robot is being used as a social interaction tool itself, but also as a hub to control different things in your environment. The Moxie robot, the one study that we're just doing right now, is using this to gather language samples from older adults who either have MCI or at risk for MCI, so we can assess changes over time through their conversations with the social robot. So it's engaging, we get language samples, and then we can analyze those language samples and identify changes in cognitive function. Another example is using the Stretch robot as a tool for making it easy for people to engage in these video chat activities. So one of our early studies, we're showing people how to do an American Sign Language lesson. And so we bring this to them, and when it's time, they don't have to remember when it is, and they're able to do the activity through Stretch robot delivering it and setting it up and starting it when it's time for them to engage. We could do the same thing in setting up family member calls. A lot of people do now these days a weekly Zoom with their family. So it's become a thing. But if you're an older adult, maybe living in assisted living, if you have memory challenges, you don't know how to get the technology to work, the robot just brings it to you and it's all ready and good to go. So when we think about how do we design technology to support social engagement, we need to think about the complexity of the space. What is the nature of the engagement, the framework that I showed you? Very importantly, you need to engage users throughout the design cycle and think broadly about what their needs are and what it is you're trying to support. I like to embrace individual differences, right? The older adult groups are very heterogeneous. One person's needs are very different. One person's preferences are very different. How do we accommodate that in our design? Most important to me is provide instructional support. There's amazing technology out in the world that people can't use because nobody provides instructional support to make it easy for them. Like the Amazon Alexa project that we did. That's an over-the-counter, relatively inexpensive. So many people we interviewed said, oh yeah, my son bought it for me, it's in the closet. I don't know what to do with it, because they missed that step of providing instructional support. And these practical applications can improve quality of life for and people in general, not just older adults. So thank you for your attention. And as I did last night, I would like to dedicate my presentation to Denise Park, founder of the Great Center. I'm delighted to be here, and I know she would be thrilled to know that I was here. So I met Denise when I was still a graduate student at Georgia Tech, and she was on the faculty at the University of Georgia. And I was engaged with her in working on the Cognitive Aging Conference for many years. I graduated, I got a job, I went to the University of Memphis, and then she recruited me to the University of Georgia. And so I was there for 1 year, and then she left. I don't take it personally. I don't think it was because of me. But we worked together for 10 years. So we had a center grant together for 10 years. And she was a big supporter of mine. And so I'm happy to see her smiling face and to get a chance to see this beautiful facility that she was involved in building. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Wendy. We're open for questions.
Yes, please.
So you're a part of the CREATE,
I am.
and we had Dr. Walter Booth come out a couple of years ago. I think at the time the VR study was in its like very early stages. But I'm glad to hear that it's still going on. That's something you're pursuing. Something I was wondering, because of the aversion towards newer technology in some older adults, do you kind of have an idea, like what do you think would be the best approach to get this into the homes of these people? Because it's obvious, like I believe that it's effective and that it's worthwhile to do. There's still just that barrier of getting it into the household. Do you have an idea of how you would approach that?
Yeah, it's a very good question. There are some older adults who are just not all that interested in trying out technology. And one of the things we've been trying to understand is, well, why might that be, right? Some are just, I'm not interested. I'm never going to be interested. It doesn't matter what you say. Okay, you're not my group. But others, there's some anxiety. I don't have the technology experience. And that's why you've heard my theme today, instructional support, and providing this scaffolding that they need. So we were talking about this morning. One of the things we're going to do is for this study, we're bringing them into our life home, our research facility, small groups. We're going to teach them how to do it. They can ask all the questions that they want, and then they get to bring it home. Likewise with the Amazon Alexa study, we sent them everything. We're going to tell you everything you need to know. And that's something we've also done in the CREATE studies over the years, is making sure you provide the support that's needed. And that'll at least get some of them past that initial barrier. Thank you. Good question, Chandra.
I also have a question about the cast. It's very fascinating. So we have a grant where we are looking at developing things from scratch, but I like your idea of curating what is existing. I know that you talked about social and cognitive. Are you thinking also about physical activities, or it's just limited to?
To a limited degree. So because we're going to be having people do this on their own at home, we wanted it to be seated.
Yes.
So we do have bowling, fishing, so it's a limited amount of physical activity to try to tap into that. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to tell them, there's a lot of apps out there in the world. Do you want to try something else? Go ahead, right? And they might end up doing things on their own, but we just needed to be a little more careful about safety concerns.
I wanted to ask, the term social engagement, as you were acknowledging in your slide, it's a kind of catch-all for a bunch of different things. Do you think that different forms of social engagement may have different impacts? In other words, there may be some kinds of ways of encouraging people to take up a particular kind of social engagement that would be more beneficial than something else.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's true, not just for social engagement, for all technologies. The best predictor of technology acceptance is perceived usefulness. Is it useful to me? One of my postdocs did a side study on virtual reality that is looking at, well, how would older adults want to use it? And what's really catchy is to play with my grandchildren.
Yes.
Right? That's going to get you into using it. I'll show my age, but when I was a young graduate student, faculty member living away from home, email was just becoming new. And my dad, I'm one of 6 kids, and my brothers and my sister and I would do email, and he felt left out. And so he took a computer class, so he could learn how to use email, so he could communicate with us. We're seeing a little bit of the same thing with the VR. Well, my grandchildren use that. If you could teach me how to use that, that would be fun, and we could do things together. So I think getting them to think about what's useful to them is critical.
So I guess I totally get that. If one of the aims of this is to try and help people stay cognitively stable, for example, then it may not be what they perceive as being most useful.
Sure.
It's actually most efficacious. We all know, we all hate weight training. We all like to do the weight training that we're good at, but of course the weight training you need to do is the weight training you don't like doing.
But if you
So-
could make it more fun somehow.
I don't disagree.
Yeah.
My point is, how do you feel like there's a tension between those two? So how are you doing anything to try to investigate that potential dissociation between what people find most acceptable and most enjoyable, and what's actually most effective for them in terms
Yeah,
of
yeah, I see you.
cognitive stability?
I don't think we know yet what, so that's part of why we started with that framework, right? And starting to explore what is going to be most beneficial. And we don't know the answer to that yet. Those are some things we wish to explore. Absolutely. It's a great question.
But Mick's point is absolutely right. For cognition, at least, we see that the ones, we ask older adults to say, now we're doing this Alzheimer's study. They go like, what's the point? Why am I doing it? But then at the end of it, when we show them the efficacy results, they go like, oh, now I see it. I still don't want to buy the game. I still don't want to play it. So it's not good for sales and marketing, but it's great to show the efficacy that,
Yeah, I mean, behavior change is the hardest thing, right? We know that. And so trying to think about what are some areas. So when I moved to the University of Illinois, I'm no longer in the psychology department. I'm in the College of Applied Health Sciences. I've learned a lot about behavior change theory, and where people are in the pre-contemplation phase. There are all these models of behavior change that are used in public health that are very useful, that I was never taught in my graduate career. And it's useful to think about where are they in their trajectory. So Dan Morrow and I wrote a chapter, no, it was a journal article actually, about a model of technology support, depending where somebody is in their health trajectory. Have I just been diagnosed? My needs may be very different. Have I had diabetes for many years and whatever I'm doing isn't working anymore? What am I trying to do with my intervention, and where is the person in their trajectory? That's very important to think about. So it's really complicated, I think, is.
Before we take any more questions from the room, can I just ask, are there any online questions?
No, there are no online questions.
Okay. Yeah, Gagan.
Thank you for a great talk. I guess I was thinking through some of the challenges, studying patterns of decreasing social isolation. You saw subtle pattern there, with the video chat intervention, and I think you ended up answering it later on, because I felt like it's not just about content. Like you did a really nice job of trying to curate shared content interests, right? But I wonder if the other dimension that's critical is the feeling of the community, right? And some of the descriptions you gave of people, their feedback was not liking certain people, like the other ones kind of pointed to that too. But then your study on the caregivers was exactly it hit that point, right? It's like once you find the community, the content almost didn't matter.
Exactly. And that was what some of the comments said,
Yeah.
right? I agree. And I think trying to find that mapping of, there was they liked meeting new people, but they had that shared underlying community. So they didn't know those other caregivers, but they had a shared experience
Right.
that they
And
started.
I think there's so many other situations in which that becomes relevant, right? It's not even limited to adults. People undergoing chemotherapy or first-time parents, right? There's lots of contexts in which that community, it feels nice to know there's someone else, and I wonder if you start dissecting in that way, if you might see gains that you.
I think you're right. And I think that's what my colleague is doing, this pilot with Southeast Asian,
Right.
and it's Southeast Asian caregivers, right? And so they have all, and then so the food topic, we've been having fun looking at food pictures because the food pictures are all going to be foods that they know. Or when we talk about transportation, it's transportation that's from their countries and they're going to tell stories and they have that shared experience. So I do think those are some of the next steps to think about.
Any other questions? Thanks so much. It's just really interesting and very different approach from we often hear in this room. But,
We are mix it up.
oh,
Yes,
absolutely. No, no,
absolutely.
I say that in the most positive way.
Okay, good. And thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.